Hey everybody, it's David Matsumoto from Humintell. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who participated in our webinar recently on the background to microexpression training and microexpressions in general. Thank you so much also for sending in all those questions both during and after the webinar. Today, I'd like to take this time to answer the questions that I did not have a chance to answer. So give me a second and we'll get started. Okay, so question number one is, how do you get better at seeing microexpressions? I know I missed so much. Well, this one's easy. Keep practicing. There's going to be some point when after you practice a lot that your training gets saturated and it becomes more natural instinct. So the thing, first of all, is to keep practicing, but also to keep them in mind when observing others. Because in my experience and in my observation of the many people that we train, if you can learn the microexpressions, but if you don't keep them in mind when you're interacting with others, you forget them and you lose them. And so it's continuing to training on the microexpressions, but also keeping them in mind to when you interact with others. Now, just because you keep them in mind doesn't necessarily mean that you'll see them. But if you remember that they can occur and you go back on your training, you will get to see them much better. So training on one hand and keeping them in mind when you're interacting with others on the other. Okay, question number two. What is the role of different cultures on microfacial expression recognition? So this is very interesting. I have seen both data as well as anecdotally in my experiences that people of different cultures do not differ. The facial configurations of people of different cultures do not differ when they're presented in microfashion. Thus, learning to read microexpressions the way we train people to do that will allow anyone to see them in people of different cultures. Now, what makes it more difficult is because microexpressions are so quick, they can be quickly covered by or followed by other kinds of expressions that are larger and thus make it appear to be different. But in reality, the actual muscles that are moving are not going to be different. Also, what's different is the amount of facial hair that people have, because people of different cultures have different norms for facial hair. And so that might make it more difficult, but the actual muscle configurations are not differing across cultures. Okay, number three, what would be the most necessary jobs that need this type of training? Well, to tell you the truth, it's any particular job in which there's an interaction or observation of others where you want to get that additional insight about the motives, the intentions, the personalities of the people that you're observing or interacting with. So in our line of work, of course, we do a lot of work with law enforcement, with national security types, with people in the intelligence world, et cetera, et cetera. But we also do a lot of work with people in the legal professions, people in healthcare settings, and many others. As long as you want to get that additional insight, and it helps you do your job. And that's almost any job, right? Hiring managers, people in loss prevention, anybody who's doing an interview, whether it's a formal or informal type of interview, as part of their job and wants to get that additional insight, wants to delve a little deeper beyond the surface of what's being said, could use this type of training. So it's not necessarily the types of jobs, I think, but more about the degree to which an individual in the job who's interacting with others wants to get that additional data or information about others. Those kinds of individuals, regardless of jobs, could benefit from this kind of training. Okay, next question. What's better about reading faces than reading the whole body? Well, there's a lot of reasons. First of all, I do want to say faces are not everything. They're a lot, but they're not everything. You can get a lot of different cues from whole body as well as faces, especially in the gestures, especially in body movements, especially in posture, of course, the tone of voice and other paralinguistic cues, et cetera, et cetera. So by no means do I wish to demean the importance of other channels of nonverbal behavior. But what's best or what's better about reading faces? First of all of the signals that we've got, of all of the across all of the channels that we have in nonverbal behavior, facial expressions are the most important. I mean, we've done this many times in studies where we can, based on data, rank order the importance of the channels in terms of the messages that are being conveyed, and facial expressions are always number one. So so if you want to get the most bang of your buck, bang for your buck in reading people, I would start with faces, number one. But there's other reasons why as well. I mean, when we read faces, we're paying attention to others. Now, I don't recommend staring at people or staring at different parts of their faces. You know, we want to learn to use this skill in an easy, not nonchalant, but an easy interactive fashion, right? But of course, most interactions, we're looking at people's faces. That's why we call it face-to-face interaction. We don't call it elbow-to-elbow interaction or knee-to-knee interaction. It's face-to-face interaction for that reason. So paying attention to faces helps us be in the interaction as well. And on the other person's side, it helps them to know that we're tracking them, we're following them, we're paying attention to them. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why reading faces is relatively better than the rest of the body. But again, that does not demean the importance of the other signals that we get from the other nonverbal channels as well. Okay, question 5. Sometimes the connection between microexpressions and emotions is under discussion. I believe you see a clear connection. Is this correct? What is your scientific view on this? Well, that's a great question about science. There's no question from a scientific standpoint that more research about microexpressions and all of their underlying correlates with experience, with physiology, with what people are perceiving, how that gates their perceptions. There's no question that more evidence is needed. And there's not as much evidence about micros in that realm as there is with macro expressions. So no question about that. I do believe that there needs to be more empirical research on those various domains that are associated with microexpressions. I do know, however, that there is enough research to demonstrate to me that there's a clear linkage between microexpressions and emotional states, or at least the activation of emotional states in terms of the perceptions of the antecedents, or what we call the evaluations or appraisals of emotion eliciting events. There's no question to me that when an emotional event is appraised as such, that a microexpression, it will produce an expression, an emotional reaction. Whether it's a microexpression or not, of course, depends upon whether the person is trying to suppress the reaction, right? But that linkage between the appraisal of an event or a stimulus and the reaction is unequivocal, I think. And because they're very transient, right? Because they're very quick, even people with macro expressions don't necessarily say they feel an emotion, right? And oftentimes emotions can occur in our bodies even when we're not consciously aware of them. So that's even more true or truer for micro expressions. No question about that. However, the link between the appraisal of a stimulus and the reaction, whether it's micro or not, is unequivocal. And so that's the connection I see every time. Most of the time when I'm interpreting microexpressions, I interpret them in terms of what the mind is processing and not necessarily the rest of the correlates of the emotional reaction, because I want to get into what the mind is processing, right? And so that's how I interpret microexpressions, and I think it's consistent with the amount of scientific evidence, both for and against, not for and against, but the lack of and the ones that exist. I think my interpretation of that is on the mark there. Hope that makes sense. Okay, next question. Does the ability to achieve a high level of focus play a role in the ability of recognizing microexpressions? So this is really great. If you remember in my webinar talk, I talked about one study that used what we call the JACBART, the Japanese and Caucasian Brief Affect Recognition Test. And our research on the JACBART, which is the predecessor of all of our microexpression training, in that study, in that article, we conducted multiple studies, and one or two of them, I can't remember exactly right now, actually included a test of the visual acuity. using a test, using a measure that presented stimuli at very high levels, very quick speeds, like microexpressions, but they were not facial expressions of emotion. Because we thought at the time that the ability to recognize microexpressions is just an artifact of the fact that some people can see things see really quickly presented stimuli really easily. I think I didn't do a good job about explaining, but anyway, I think you're following what I'm saying. And our research demonstrated that the ability to see microexpressions was not associated with that visual acuity. And in fact, they're two separate things. And thus, I can pretty much say to this question, the ability to achieve a high level of focus really does not play that big of a role. Now, because we know that they're two separate things, even then, we know that there's a large degree of individual differences in the natural propensity to see microexpressions, as there is in the natural propensity to see quickly presented stimuli, regardless of the fact that they're not facial expressions of emotion. But they're just two separate systems. And we know that regardless of where people start in the individual difference dimension, training brings them up to a certain degree. Training brings almost everybody up a certain degree, and it eliminates gender effects. And so while there are gender effects in the natural propensities and the ranges, those eliminate with training. So I know I'm a little bit sideways on this answer, but that's what we also found out from this line of research. So I hope that answers that question too. Okay, here's the next question. Why don't we develop videos as a tool to detect microexpressions? Another great question. And yes, if we had the ability to create videos and use those videos as training stimuli, sure, that probably would be better. However, it's difficult to find them in naturally occurring situations, right? Because we want a breadth of different expressors in terms of their individual differences in their physiognomies, ethnic backgrounds, and whatnot. And we want them to be, we want the microexpressions to be displayed in about equal intensities within an emotion. I think this is related to how we created the microexpression training tool in the beginning, which was covered in that previous webinar. And so, yeah, that probably is better. It's a lot of work to do that. And the reason why I'm hedging is because of this. So we use stills and we present the stills in that sandwich format, right? With a neutral and a target expression in a neutral. And we've actually developed some videos from those stills where you can do that, right? And use some of that. What we found, however, is that when we train people in our current format using the stills, we can transition them to seeing those microexpressions in real life videos and spontaneous behavior and in real life settings. So then the question becomes, what's the payoff in us to take the time, effort, and cost to develop such tools to achieve basically the same result? And so for that reason, to tell you the truth, I made the decision many years ago not to go ahead and put that time, effort, and cost into this because the endpoint is generally the same. So that's what I'm thinking about this now until I see any other reason why to think differently about it. And we're always happy to do so. You know, until we see that kind of evidence, I think we'll continue our way. Now, does it mean that we can't improve our stimuli and we can't improve our courses? But with regard to this particular question, that's the answer. Here's the next question. If it's difficult to detect expressions in videos, why don't we use artificial intelligence or machine learning techniques to detect facial muscles? Well, as you might know, there are many companies and organizations out there that have been trying to develop computer vision technology to detect facial expressions of emotion in general, microexpression in particular, I'd say for over 30 years. I know a lot about them. I have my doubts about them, and I've actually tested most of those that claim to be front runners in this field. I personally think that we're not there yet in terms of this kind of technology. I'm willing to see anybody else's technology to figure that out and actually test them. in the meantime, because of that, but also because I'm really interested in helping people get better, right, with this skill and with the other skills. And I always think that in the meantime, the best processor of detecting expressions, microexpressions, and anything else is right here in between our ears. It's in each person's brain. And that's why we spend a lot of time and effort trying to train individuals to do that themselves. Yes, one day I do believe that we will have such technology as aids, but even then, we will need a human operator to help interpret what's going on. So that's my answer to that question. Okay, question 8. What do you think about using videos in the training process? So it's kind of related to the previous question. If we're talking about using videos in the training of the microexpression detection, I answered that in the previous question. But if we're talking about using videos that portray microexpressions or not, after the microexpression training, yes, of course, what we want to do is train people up using a standardized test and then transition their skill to videos and then transition to their skill to real life behavior. So there's no question about that's how we or I understand the placement of the use of videos in the training process. But the second question, is there any reason why you didn't want to use videos but use photos instead? That was the same question as the previous one. So I refer back to the previous question. Okay, question 9. When I go to microexpression training, should I treat it like an athlete training who need to exercise on a regular basis to keep up in shape? Or will I get to the point where I will be able to recognize microexpressions without the need for training? So the answer is yes and yes. As I mentioned as I replied to one of the previous questions, in the beginning, yes, you need to train up and you need to spend time on training just like an athlete would spend time on training. At some point, as I mentioned earlier, we'll get saturated, right? And so the need for that kind of refresher training will go down. It's still good to do it every once in a while, right? But the need to do the refresher training will go down because we've internalized the skill. But it's getting to the point where we've internalized the skill that makes that this question is referring to. So for example, with me and many other people that we work with and train, of course it's internalized, and I don't do that much training myself, except when I train people, I'm actually going through the training myself. So I do a lot of it, right? But yeah, I think for most people, you have to train on it like an athlete in the beginning until it becomes somewhat internalized. And then you keep at the need for that refresher goes down after a while. Question 10. Normally, I want a candidate to feel comfortable during a recruitment interview, but microexpressions show best during high-stakes interactions. Is there a specific technique you recommend when asking behavioral-based interview questions to keep the candidate comfortable, but also nervous enough to show a true emotion through microexpression? So this is a really interesting question. Has multiple angles to this, I think. This person is exactly right. Most microexpressions are more likely to occur during high-stakes interactions, but even then, it's not only within high-stakes interactions, it's on high-stakes topics, right? So it's on high-stakes topics. So in answering to that question, so you can be in a high-stakes interaction, but if you're off topic, right, and just the interviewee is just rambling on about something, then you probably won't see the microexpressions, even though this is a high-stakes interaction. But the topic is the issue. So going to the second part of this question, is there a specific technique you recommend? Yeah, but it's not the microexpressions training. It's about what kind of questions to ask, how to keep people on topic. And at that point, we're talking about interview strategy and tactics. And at that point, now we're talking about everybody's different, right? It depends upon what kind of interviews you're doing and for what purpose, and et cetera, et cetera. You may be trained in a particular interview technique. But the general rule is, if you want to be, microexpressions are more likely to be seen when you're on high stakes topics. And the question then becomes, if those topics are important for you in your interview, then it becomes an interview strategy and tactic question to come back to these topics. So it's not necessarily a technique about microexpression reading, right? It's always about the questions that are being asked. And in general, I always say this: when you're in the world of behavioral indicators, whether they're nonverbal or verbal behavioral indicators, those have to be tied to the specific questioning strategy or interviewing strategy and tactics. Because like I say, if one is not tied to the other, then it's really difficult to take advantage of the benefits that can be obtained from both. So I hope that answers this question. Next question, are there any competencies that you recommend targeting during a recruitment interview that may reveal microexpressions more so than others? So this question is almost exactly like the previous question, right? It's not necessarily the competencies. I think you focus on the competencies that are important for you to ferret out in the interview. And you want to make sure that you're going over high stakes issues. And that's where microexpressions are more likely to be revealed. Now, that being said, I know that even when you're in the rapport building part of an interview, or even places, times when you think this is not a formal interview, but you're just interacting with people, you will see microexpressions. I see them all the time. And many people we train see them all the time. They may not be on target topic issues, but they're giving you some kind of insight about the individual, right? And you may just want to file that away in your mind, because that may be telling you something about how that person thinks and thus feels about that particular topic, even though it's not necessarily or directly related to what you want to get to. But you may be able to use that or leverage that information at some point to further develop rapport, to further have somebody reveal their truer thoughts and feelings about things. So you never know where that goes. So you can and do see microexpressions in non-target topic times. My suggestion in general is just file those away so that you may leverage them later on. Okay, here's the next question. Would you prefer virtual video recording to observe full expressions over interviewing in person while wearing a mask? Well, this is an excellent question. Now, of course, my devious mind goes to, I don't accept this dichotomy. I want to find a way which I can get both, right? And so my first thought is there a way I can get both here and then try to get that? If I were in one mode or the other, and that's what it has to be, I'm not exactly sure what I would take. I mean, of course, it depends on the quality of the video, the angle of the camera, the resolution of the camera that's being used, et cetera, et cetera. Assuming that's great, I might take the video, to tell you the truth. The reason why I'm hesitating is, even with a mask, as I mentioned in the webinar, we can still pick up a lot, but we don't pick up as much. On the other hand, in person, you get other cues, right? You get the body, you get a better sense of the tone. Well, it'll be masked, but you get a better sense of the overall interaction because you can feel it if you're there. But still, I think I would prefer the virtual video over the mask, if that was truly one or the other choice. Okay, question 13. Are there any famous incidents of crimes being prevented through microexpression training reading? I remembered Lie to Me talked about the murderer's face. Well, so the answer is yes. I can think of many of those, and not only incidents of crimes, but also other kinds of interviews that led to other discoveries or other information, or just revealing things that were not apparent if you didn't see the microexpressions. Unfortunately, I don't feel comfortable about answering some of those things because these are investigative tools for a lot of people, and I don't want to be talking about them. And so the answer is yes. Question 14, can you recommend any recent publications on microexpressions? Sure can. And at the end of this, I'll make sure that we put together a listing of some publications to go along with this video. Okay, next question. Are there any degrees or programs where I can study facial expressions or microexpressions in a university? I haven't been able to find any. So in general, no. I believe there might be one that's out there. We can check that. I'll make sure that we put that information together with this video. But in general, no, there's no degrees or programs in most universities about nonverbal behavior, nonverbal communication, and thus microexpressions. However, I'm asked this question quite a lot, And my common response is to those people who are interested in this, especially if you're interested in a degree portion of this skill, because obviously you can gain the skill without a degree. But if people want to get a degree, my suggestion is always to get it in basic research, because basic research should train about critical thinking skills and being able to use microexpressions once you see them. I get it, the skill is one thing, but once you see them, these are exercises in critical thinking. And so my suggestion is always get a basic research degree in psychology or something related to social science research, where one can understand the research underlying facial expressions of emotion, nonverbal communication, nonverbal behavior, microexpressions, because that gives you the depth of knowledge, right, that you can use to then apply that skill. And so again, unfortunately, no, in most cases, I don't think that there are such degrees or programs. If there are any, we will surely list them. And if anybody knows of them, please let us know. We'll be happy to take a look at them. But in general, I suggest to people to get degrees in, or to think about degrees in basic research methodologies. Okay, question 16. What do you think about the face reading techniques, like those face readers who read the physiognomy and the muscle movement? Yeah. So this is also interesting. First of all, let's make sure we're talking about face reading has to do with reading the physiognomy or the characteristics of one's face, not the expressions of the muscle that are based on muscle movements. Face reading has been around forever, right? And it has gone through many different evolutions in thought over the last century. About a century ago, and until recent history, to tell you the truth, the thought about reading anything important from a person's physiognomy or their body structures that also that it was thought to be not that invalid. However, there's been recent evidence that demonstrates that certain types of facial characteristics are associated with certain types of personalities. And that may be then indicative of certain types of histories and also behavioral tendencies in the future. So I do believe there's something about that. I'm not so sure about the overall validity and reliability of such evidence as one moves through and sees the entire range of human faces, both in any one culture and then across cultures. I do believe that if you're in this genre, reading facial expressions gives you way more information. So I think there may be something there, but I'm not, and certainly I think now more than that, more than before, no question about it, but I'm still skeptical about it. Okay, our final question. I have a question regarding contempt. Some younger people say that they do not see contempt in this way. In faces of older people, they see that expression. In faces of younger people, they don't see contempt in this way. My first thought is they don't see the microexpressions, or is it possible that contempt changed a little by generation? So this is a multi-pronged or multi-angled question, right? I don't think the expression of contempt or the expression of any of the other emotions has changed across generations or across centuries or across different cultures. I don't believe that those expressions have changed. But when people say they don't see something, we're talking about people's judgments, right? And judgments change because judgments are influenced by many other things, by language, by values, by perceptions and whatnot. So I can certainly see that some groups of people may think that they don't see contempt that way. I can certainly see that. And there's ample evidence for people of different cultures, I don't know about generation, but people of different cultures seeing an expression and perceiving it differently. But that's a different question than whether that expression itself means the same thing or not to the person expressing it, right? So my answer is it's not possible that the expression of contempt has changed by generation, but it is possible that people think, and again, they think that they see them differently. So both are reasonable to me. If I were to follow up on this question a little bit more, I would want to know a little bit more about what people think they're seeing when they see contempt and what people think they're seeing when they see the contempt expression. It's clear to me that when you show people, there's been research that I've done with others, that you show the contempt expression and they may or may not label it as contempt or a synonym of contempt. But labeling expressions is only one way to understand whether people are perceiving it that way or not. Another way to think about it is what they interpret that expression to mean to the person and how they interpret what the person's next thoughts and behaviors may be. When you get that kind of data, that kind of judgments about the contempt expression, it's clear it's about contempt, even though people may not label it as contempt. And if I remember, I will make sure that we'll put one of our papers up that explored this issue as well, together with this video. Okay, everybody. So those were the questions that we had received that I did not go over during the webinar. Happy to talk about any other questions that anybody else may have. I hope this has been interesting and meaningful for you. Look forward to seeing you again at a new time. Take care.